Tonight, we dive into a world where pack bonds run deeper than blood, where political marriages can shatter souls, and where the line between love and betrayal becomes a razor's edge that cuts both ways. This is the story of Raven, a woman whose heart was broken by duty, whose trust was weaponized by enemies, and whose choices will determine whether love can survive when it becomes the ultimate act of war. In the next hour, you'll witness passion that burns like wildfire, secrets that kill like poison, and a love so powerful it might just save everyone, or destroy them all. If you're ready to feel every heartbeat, every betrayal, every impossible kiss that could be the last, hit subscribe and let the story begin. The parchment felt like broken glass between Raven's fingers as she read the formal dissolution for the third time, each word carving deeper into her chest. 24 hours ago, Adrian's hands had traced every curve of her body with reverent worship, his voice a whispered prayer against her throat. "You're my forever, Raven. My Luna. My everything." Now those same hands had signed her away like a discarded treaty, the ink still wet with her dreams. The great hall of the Silver Moon Pack stretched before her like a mausoleum, its stone walls echoing with 5 years of stolen kisses and secret promises. The scent of pine and wood smoke, Adrian's scent, clung to her skin like a ghost refusing to leave. I was supposed to wear his mark by winter solstice, she thought, her fingers unconsciously touching the unmarked flesh of her neck. I was supposed to be his Luna, his equal, his choice. But wolves didn't always get to choose, did they? The engagement is terminated effective immediately. Alpha Donovan's voice cut through her memories like a blade through silk. Adrian's father stood behind the ornate desk, his silver hair gleaming in the firelight, his eyes holding the cold calculation of a ruler who had forgotten what it meant to be a father. Adrian will wed Lydia Blackmoon within the week to secure our alliance with the Northern Territories. War is coming, girl, and love is a luxury we cannot afford. Raven's wolf howled inside her chest, a sound of pure anguish that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. 5 years, she whispered, her voice breaking like autumn leaves. 5 years of my life, my heart, my soul, and it means nothing. The betrayal wasn't just Adrian's. It belonged to every moment they'd shared, every whispered "I love you" that had apparently been built on sand. She looked toward the doorway where Adrian should have been, where he should have fought for them, but found only empty shadows and the bitter taste of abandonment. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who offer comfort when you're bleeding. 3 nights of sleepless torment had hollowed Raven's cheeks and painted dark circles beneath her green eyes when the stranger appeared. She sat by the dying embers of her cottage fire, Adrian's letters scattered around her like the remnants of a battlefield, when the knock came, soft, almost respectful, as if the visitor understood the fragility of broken hearts. Marcus Shadowpeak filled her doorway like a living nightmare made beautiful. Where Adrian was golden warmth and familiar comfort, Marcus was dark velvet and dangerous edges, the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about in whispered bedtime stories. His midnight black hair caught the moonlight, and his silver eyes held depths that seemed to see straight through to her wounded soul. I should be afraid, Raven thought, but pain had burned away her capacity for proper fear. What's the worst he could do? Break my heart? Someone already claimed that prize. Raven Nightshade, Marcus said, his voice like aged whiskey in winter storms. May I? He gestured toward her sitting room with the practiced grace of a man accustomed to power, but his eyes held something unexpected, sympathy perhaps, or recognition of shared pain. When she nodded, too numb to refuse, he moved with predatory elegance, settling across from her like he belonged in her broken world. I know what Adrian did to you, Marcus continued, producing a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her cottage rent. I know about the promises, the plans, the private jokes you shared when you thought no one was watching. Raven's blood chilled. How could this stranger know about the way Adrian used to trace constellations on her back, or the pet name he'd whispered only in their most intimate moments? He threw away his greatest weapon, Marcus said, pouring wine into 2 glasses with steady hands. But perhaps his loss could become your victory. The wine tasted like dark cherries and dangerous possibilities. What are you saying? Raven asked, her voice hoarse from days of crying. Marcus smiled then, and it was beautiful and terrible, and full of promises. that felt like salvation wrapped in damnation. I'm saying, dear Raven, that sometimes the best revenge is simply giving someone exactly what they deserve. And Adrian Silvermoon deserves to lose everything he holds dear, just as he made you lose everything you held sacred. The most seductive lies are the ones wrapped in just enough truth to feel like justice. He's planning to eliminate them, you know. Marcus's words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would soon become tsunamis. He'd been watching Raven's face carefully as he spoke, cataloging every micro-expression, every barely contained gasp. The allied packs. Once he's secured their territories through marriage and trust, Adrian plans to absorb their power, eliminate their leadership, and rule the entire northern region as a supreme alpha. Your beloved wasn't just choosing politics over love, darling. He was choosing genocide over you. Raven's wineglass trembled in her grip, the dark liquid sloshing like blood in a chalice. No, she whispered, but even as the word left her lips, pieces began clicking into place. Hushed conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, maps she wasn't supposed to see, the way Adrian's eyes had grown distant whenever pack politics arose. He wouldn't. He's not that kind of man. But was he? Had she ever really known the man behind the alpha mask? I have proof, Marcus continued, his voice gentle as a lover's caress and deadly as a viper's strike. From his coat, he produced photographs, grainy but clear surveillance shots of Adrian meeting with mercenaries, documents bearing his signature authorizing territorial consolidation, strategic maps marked with red X's over pack territories. The Black Moon Alliance is just the beginning. Once Lydia's father trusts him completely, Adrian will strike. Hundreds will die, Raven. Innocent families, children, elders who've lived in peace for generations. The cottage felt too small suddenly, the walls closing in as Raven's world restructured itself around this new, horrible reality. If this is true, she began. But Marcus raised a hand, his expression shifting from manipulation to something that looked almost like genuine concern. I'm not asking you to take my word for it, he said. I'm asking you to help me prove it. You know Adrian better than anyone. His habits, his weaknesses, the way his mind works. You have access other spies could never achieve. You want me to betray him? The words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but beneath the horror, something else stirred. A dark satisfaction at the thought of Adrian feeling even a fraction of the pain he'd caused her. Marcus leaned back, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors of destiny. I want you to save lives, Raven. I want you to prevent a massacre. And yes, his voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to caress her very soul. I want you to make him pay for breaking something beautiful for the sake of something monstrous. The first lie you tell as a spy isn't to your enemy. It's to yourself, when you pretend you're doing it for noble reasons. Raven's hands shook as she applied lip gloss in the reflection of her phone screen, preparing for what Marcus called reconnaissance, but what felt like walking into her own grave. The Silver Moon territory stretched before her like a landscape of memories, every tree a witness to stolen kisses, every path a roadmap to moments when she'd believed in forever. I'm doing this to save lives, she told herself, but the words felt hollow against the thunder of her heartbeat. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm better than that. The lie sat bitter on her tongue. The pack house rose from the forest like a castle from a fairy tale, its stone walls covered in ivy that Adrian had once helped her climb to reach the roof where they'd counted stars. Now those same walls felt like prison bars, and she was both the prisoner and the guard. A Omega servant answered her knock, young Beth, who'd always admired Raven's relationship with their future alpha. Miss Raven. Beth's face lit up with genuine joy. Are you here to plan the wedding? Oh, wait. The girl's expression crumbled as reality crashed down. I'm so sorry. I forgot about... It's all right, Beth, Raven managed, her voice steadier than her heart. I'm just here to collect some things I left behind. The lie came easier than breathing now, lubricated by pain and justified by Marcus's photographs burning holes in her memory. She moved through the familiar hallways like a ghost haunting her own past, each step taking her deeper into territory that was no longer hers, toward a man who was no longer her future. Adrian's study smelled of leather and pine, of late nights spent planning their future pack leadership together. Raven's fingers traced the desk where they'd spread maps and dreamed of expanding territory through alliance rather than conquest. How many of those dreams were lies, she wondered as she photographed documents with the tiny camera Marcus had given her. Strategic supply routes, guard rotation schedules, vulnerable border points, information that could save lives or end them, depending on whose hands held the power. Raven? His voice hit her like lightning, familiar and beloved and terrible all at once. She spun, phone hidden behind her back, to find Adrian standing in the doorway looking like he'd seen a ghost. His golden hair was disheveled, his blue eyes wide with something that looked almost like hope. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stood in the ruins of their shared dreams, breathing the same air that had once carried promises of forever. I didn't know you were here, he said, his voice rough as broken glass. I've been hoping. The most dangerous battles are fought not with swords and claws, but with whispered words and remembered touches. Don't. The word escaped Raven's lips like a prayer and a warning, but Adrian had already crossed the threshold, closing the study door behind him with careful deliberation. The soft click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence, sealing them into this space where their history lived in every shadow, every scent, every carefully chosen piece of furniture. I can't do this, she thought desperately. Not when he looks at me like I'm still his everything. Not when my heart is screaming to forget Marcus, forget the mission, forget everything except the way he used to whisper my name like a sacred text. You've been avoiding me for 3 weeks, Adrian said, his voice carrying that blend of authority and vulnerability that had always been her weakness. He moved closer, each step measured and predatory, until she could see the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched with barely controlled emotion. Do you know what that's been doing to me? Knowing you're out there, hurting because of my choices, and I can't. He stopped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I can't even explain why I had to choose duty over heart. The photographs on his desk seemed to burn against her consciousness, evidence of his alleged betrayals, proof that this man she'd loved with every fiber of her being might be planning mass murder. But standing this close to him, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and winter storms, feeling the gravitational pull that had always existed between them, Marcus's warnings felt like distant thunder. Tell me it isn't true, she wanted to beg. Tell me you're not the monster he says you are. Give me a reason to walk away from this path of destruction before it consumes us both. The wedding is tomorrow, Adrian continued, his voice dropping to that intimate register he'd once reserved only for her. I'll stand at that altar and speak vows to another woman, bind myself to someone I barely know, create a political alliance that tastes like ash in my mouth. And you know what the worst part is? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, his fingers brushing against her cheek with reverent tenderness. The worst part is that she'll never know me like you do. She'll never understand why I wake up screaming from nightmares about losing the people I'm supposed to protect. Raven's resolve cracked like ice in spring. Adrian, she breathed, leaning involuntarily into his touch, her body remembering 5 years of love even as her mind cataloged information for Marcus. This was the moment. She could feel it approaching like a storm front. The choice between the mission and the man, between justice and love, between the future Marcus promised and the past Adrian represented. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she closed her eyes, memorizing the touch that might be their last. Some kisses taste like goodbye before they even begin. Their lips met like the collision of stars, inevitable, destructive, and breathtakingly beautiful. Adrian's hands tangled in her dark hair as 5 years of separation dissolved into desperate hunger. And for one perfect, terrible moment, Raven forgot about cameras and conspiracies and the weight of other people's lives hanging in the balance. She forgot everything except the way he whispered her name like a prayer against her mouth, the way his body trembled as if touching her might save his soul or damn it completely. This is wrong, her conscience screamed as her arms wound around his neck, pulling him deeper into the kiss that tasted like salt tears and broken promises. He's marrying someone else tomorrow. I'm supposed to be gathering intelligence for his enemy. Everything about this is poison. But her heart had been starving for 21 days, and Adrian's love felt like the first meal after a famine. His lips traced the line of her jaw, finding that sensitive spot below her ear that made her gasp, and she could feel his wedding preparations dissolving like sugar in rain. Run away with me. The words tumbled from Adrian's lips between desperate kisses, his voice raw with the kind of vulnerability that could shatter kingdoms. Right now. Tonight. We'll disappear into the human world, start over somewhere no one knows about pack politics, or arranged marriages, or the weight of crowns we never asked to wear. His hands framed her face like she was something precious and breakable, his blue eyes blazing with hope that felt like staring into the sun. I don't care about alliances or territories or my father's approval. I only care about you. Raven's heart stopped. He would do it, she realized with stunning clarity. He would throw away everything. His pack, his birthright, his responsibility to hundreds of wolves, just to be with me. The knowledge should have felt like victory, like vindication for every tear she'd shed. Instead, it felt like acid eating through her chest, because somewhere in the back of her mind, Marcus's voice whispered like poison. What about the innocent families who will die if you don't stop him? What about the children who will never grow up because you chose love over justice? She pulled back from the kiss, her lips already missing his warmth, her hands shaking as she pressed them against his chest. Adrian, The words died in her throat as she saw something that made her blood freeze. There, on his desk next to the wedding invitations, lay an open folder marked Territorial Expansion, Phase 3, maps, casualty projections, strategic elimination protocols, everything Marcus had warned her about, displayed in Adrian's own handwriting like a roadmap to genocide. Oh God, she thought, her stomach lurching. It's all true. Paradise becomes hell the moment you realize the apple was always poisoned. Raven's world tilted sideways as she stared at the documents spread across Adrian's desk like accusations written in blood. Troop movements designed to surround allied territories. Supply line disruptions that would starve opposing packs into submission. Psychological warfare tactics targeting pack leaders' families. Each page was a masterclass in calculated brutality, signed in Adrian's careful script, dated just days after their engagement had been dissolved. While I was crying myself to sleep, he was planning mass murder, she thought, nausea rising in her throat like bile. Raven? Adrian's voice seemed to come from very far away, though he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. You look like you've seen a ghost. His gaze followed hers to the open folder, and she watched in real time as his expression shifted from concern to horror, to something that looked almost like relief. You know, he said quietly, his shoulders sagging as if a tremendous weight had finally broken free. Part of me is glad you finally know the truth. Glad? The word erupted from her lips like a physical blow. She spun to face him, her green eyes blazing with betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. You're glad that I discovered you're planning genocide? You're relieved that I know the man I loved for 5 years is actually a monster wearing his face? Her voice cracked on the last word. 5 years of trust shattering like crystal against stone. The Adrian she'd known, the one who rescued injured birds and cried during sad movies, felt like a beautiful lie designed to hide this terrible truth. Adrian's face crumpled, his hand reaching toward her before falling helplessly to his side. It's not what you think, he said, his voice desperate with the kind of panic that comes from watching your entire world collapse. These plans, God, Raven, I never wanted this. But my father, the Pack Council, they've been pushing for total territorial control since before we met. They said it was the only way to ensure our survival, that compromise and alliance would eventually lead to our destruction. So you chose to become the destroyer instead, Raven whispered, backing away from him, as if his very presence might contaminate her soul. The study walls seemed to close in around them, heavy with the weight of secrets and the stench of betrayal. All those nights we spent dreaming about a peaceful future, about building alliances through love instead of fear. You were planning this the entire time. The pain in her chest felt like drowning from the inside, like every breath was filled with water instead of air. Adrian's eyes filled with tears that caught the lamplight like liquid silver. I thought I could change their minds, he said, his voice breaking like a child confessing to murder. I thought if I married for alliance, proved my loyalty to the Council's vision, I could eventually steer us toward a more peaceful path. I thought. He stopped, his hand pressing against his heart as if trying to hold himself together. I thought I could protect you from this darkness. I thought if you never knew, if you found someone else to love, you could stay innocent of what I had to become. The most tragic heroes are those who see the abyss they're walking toward but can't find the strength to change course. You could have told me. Raven's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 5 years' worth of trust that had just turned to ash. All this time, Adrian, you could have told me what they were demanding of you. We could have figured out another way. We could have run away together or fought back or anything except this." She gestured at the documents with trembling fingers, each page representing hundreds of lives that would be lost because the man she'd loved had chosen the path of least resistance. Adrian laughed, but it was a sound empty of humor, bitter and hollow like wind through graveyards. "Tell you? And make you complicit in genocide? Make you choose between your moral center and your love for me?" He ran his hands through his golden hair, leaving it wild and unkempt, transforming him from the composed alpha heir into something raw and desperate. "I've been drowning in this darkness for months, Raven. Every council meeting, every strategic session, every time my father looked at me with pride for becoming the monster he always wanted me to be. The study felt like a confessional booth, heavy with the weight of sins and regrets. Raven found herself caught between fury and heartbreak, watching the man she'd planned to spend eternity with crumble before her eyes. He's not the villain of this story, she realized with crystalline clarity. He's the casualty. The real monsters are the ones who shaped him into a weapon and called it leadership. But understanding his pain didn't erase the blood that would be spilled because of his weakness. "The night I agreed to marry Lydia," Adrian continued, his voice thick with unshed tears, "I locked myself in my room and wrote 17 different suicide notes, because I couldn't figure out how to live in a world where loving you meant becoming a mass murderer, but refusing to become a mass murderer meant watching our pack get destroyed by the very enemies these plans are supposed to eliminate." He looked at her then, his blue eyes holding depths of anguish that made her chest ache. "Do you understand the impossible position I'm in? Every choice leads to blood. Every decision makes me someone's executioner." Raven's anger began to transform into something more complex, a mixture of love and pity and desperate determination. "There has to be another way," she thought fiercely. "There has to be a path that doesn't require him to become a monster or die as a martyr." But even as hope flickered in her chest, Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. "Some situations can only be resolved through careful, strategic action. Sometimes, Raven, love means being willing to break the thing you're trying to save. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes it comes too late." The sound of footsteps in the hallway shattered the intimate agony of the study, like glass breaking against stone. Raven and Adrian sprang apart, her heart hammering against her ribs as the reality of their situation crashed down around them. "If anyone sees us like this," she thought desperately. But before she could finish the thought, the door opened to reveal the last person either of them expected. Lydia Blackmoon, Adrian's bride-to-be, standing in the doorway like an avenging angel dressed in midnight silk. Lydia was beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful. Remote, powerful, and slightly dangerous to approach without proper preparation. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, like liquid moonlight, and her violet eyes held an intelligence that seemed to catalog every detail of the scene before her. Adrian's tear-stained face, Raven's disheveled appearance, the scattered documents on the desk, the electric tension that still hummed between former lovers. This should be awkward, Raven thought, bracing for accusations and fury. Instead, Lydia closed the door behind her and smiled. "Thank the goddess," Lydia said, her voice carrying notes of genuine relief that made both Adrian and Raven stare at her in shock. "I was wondering how long it would take for someone to finally have this conversation." She moved into the room with predatory grace, her gaze lingering on the territorial expansion documents with something that looked like disgust. "Adrian, you look terrible. Raven, you look like you're about to either murder someone or throw yourself off a cliff. I'm assuming both reactions have something to do with these charming genocide blueprints?" Adrian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Lydia, we weren't. This isn't what it looks like." The lies tumbled from his lips in a desperate cascade, but Lydia held up one elegant hand to stop him, her expression shifting from amusement to something far more serious. "Adrian, darling, I know exactly what this is. This is the moment when you're finally forced to confront the fact that marrying me tomorrow will make you complicit in your father's vision of a blood-soaked empire." Raven felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as new possibilities began to crystallize. She knows, she realized with dawning wonder. She knows about the plans, about the forced marriage, about everything, and she's not angry. She's relieved that someone else finally sees the truth. The political alliance suddenly looked less like a love story, and more like two victims being shackled together to enable atrocities neither of them wanted to commit. "I have a proposition for all of us," Lydia continued, settling into Adrian's desk chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "What if I told you there was a way to stop the genocide, save both our packs, and ensure that no one has to marry someone they don't love? What if I told you that the real enemy isn't each other? It's the system that's trying to turn us all into weapons." Her violet eyes glittered with dangerous intelligence as she looked between them. "But it would require trust, courage, and a willingness to betray everything our fathers have taught us about power. The most dangerous alliances are born not from friendship, but from shared desperation. My father isn't just interested in territorial expansion," Lydia began, her voice carrying the careful cadence of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of strategic revelation. "He's dying. Lung cancer, advanced stage, maybe 6 months left if he's lucky. The marriage alliance wasn't about strengthening our packs. It was about ensuring that when he dies, the Black Moon territory gets absorbed into Silver Moon holdings rather than falling into chaos." She paused, letting the implications sink in like stones dropped into still water. "Adrian, your father promised mine that you would maintain stability in our region. We both know what that means." Raven's mind raced as pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Mass murder disguised as peacekeeping, she thought, her stomach churning. They're not planning conquest. They're planning ethnic cleansing with a political justification. The documents on Adrian's desk suddenly looked even more sinister, each strategic notation representing families torn apart, communities destroyed, generations of wolves who would never live to see another full moon. "But here's what our fathers don't know," Lydia continued, rising from the chair with fluid grace and moving to the window where moonlight painted her features in silver and shadow. "I've been building my own network for the past 2 years. Intelligence gatherers, sympathetic pack members, allies who believe there has to be a better way than endless cycles of dominance and submission." Her reflection in the glass looked like a goddess of war, beautiful and terrible and utterly determined. "We call ourselves the Underground, and we've been waiting for someone with access to Silver Moon's inner circle to help us prevent the coming massacre." Adrian's face had gone pale as parchment, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "You're talking about treason," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the crackling of the fireplace. "If our fathers discover what you're planning—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they all knew the completion. Execution, exile, or worse. The pack laws regarding betrayal were written in blood and enforced without mercy. "Adrian," Raven said softly, stepping closer to him until she could see her own reflection in his tortured eyes. "What's more treasonous, plotting to save innocent lives, or participating in genocide because you're too afraid to stand up to your father?" The words felt like throwing down a gauntlet, challenging him to finally choose between the coward's path and the hero's burden. "This is it," she realized with crystalline clarity. "This is the moment where he either becomes the man I believed he could be, or reveals that Marcus was right about his fundamental weakness." Lydia's violet eyes fixed on Raven with laser intensity. "There's something else you should know, Raven. We've been monitoring Marcus Shadowpeak's activities for months. His offer to help you get revenge, his claims about preventing massacre, they're partially true, but his ultimate goal isn't peace. He wants to eliminate both our packs and rule the entire Northern Territory himself. You've been recruited by someone who's just as much a monster as the system you're fighting against. The moment you realize you've been everyone's pawn is the moment you must decide whether to remain a piece on the board or flip the table entirely." The silence that followed Lydia's revelation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Raven felt the world tilt sideways, as every certainty she'd clung to dissolved into smoke and mirrors. "Marcus used me," she thought, her hands trembling as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. "While I thought I was choosing between love and justice, I was actually choosing between 3 different flavors of genocide." The weight of her betrayal, of Adrian, of her pack, of her own moral center, crashed down on her like an avalanche. "I have something to confess," Raven whispered, her voice breaking like glass against stone. Both Adrian and Lydia turned toward her, their faces expectant, and she felt like a condemned prisoner about to read her own death sentence. Marcus Shadowpeak approached me 3 weeks ago. He recruited me to spy on Adrian. I've been photographing documents, reporting on pack defenses, feeding him intelligence about Silver Moon operations. The words tumbled out in a rush, each one a nail in her own coffin. Adrian's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, betrayal, hurt, and finally a terrible understanding that made him stagger backward as if she'd physically struck him. "The questions about patrol routes," he said slowly, his voice hollow as an echo in an empty tomb. "The way you always seem to know exactly when security would be lightest. The access codes that got mysteriously changed after your visits." His blue eyes filled with a pain so profound it made her chest ache. "How long, Raven? How long have you been working for our enemy?" "Since the night after you married Lydia," she confessed, unable to meet his gaze, focusing instead on her hands which looked like they belonged to a stranger. 21 days of betrayal. 21 days of lying to the man I love while helping someone who wants to destroy him. The shame felt like acid eating through her veins, consuming everything she'd thought she knew about herself. God, Adrian, I thought I was saving lives. Marcus showed me documents, photographs that proved you were planning mass murder. I thought I was choosing justice over love." Lydia's voice cut through the emotional wreckage like a blade through silk. "What kind of documents? What exactly did Marcus show you to convince you that Adrian was a monster?" Her violet eyes had gone sharp as laser beams, focused with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle whose solution could mean the difference between life and death. When Raven described the photographs, the casualty projections, the strategic elimination protocols, Lydia nodded grimly. "Fabricated. All of it. Marcus has been planning this manipulation for months, probably years." "But they had Adrian's signature," Raven protested weakly, even as hope began to flicker in her chest like a candle in a storm. The handwriting looked authentic. The dates were recent. Lydia moved to Adrian's desk, pulling out a drawer that revealed stacks of documents. Real ones, Raven realized, comparing them to her memories of Marcus's evidence. "Look at the letterhead, the paper quality, the ink consistency. Marcus is many things, but subtle isn't one of them. He needed you desperate and angry enough to betray everything you believed in, so he created exactly the evidence that would push you over the edge. Sometimes the only way to stop a war is to start a different one. He has my intelligence reports," Raven said, her voice steady, despite the chaos consuming her thoughts. "Everything I gathered over the past 3 weeks, guard rotations, weak points in our defenses, the locations of ammunition stores, even the secret tunnels beneath the pack house that Adrian showed me years ago. Each revelation felt like watching dominoes fall, seeing exactly how her love and pain had been weaponized to create the perfect storm of destruction. If Marcus attacks tonight—" "He will," Lydia interrupted, her fingers flying across her phone screen as she sent rapid-fire messages to her underground network. The wedding created the perfect distraction. Most of our allies are either here celebrating or traveling home with reduced security. It's exactly the kind of opportunity a strategic mind like Marcus would exploit. Her violet eyes met Raven's with something that might have been respect. "The question is, are you ready to stop being his weapon and start being ours?" Adrian had been silent through this exchange, his face cycling through emotions like seasons changing in fast forward. Now he stepped closer to Raven, his hand reaching out to cup her face with a tenderness that made her heart shatter and reform simultaneously. "You thought I was a monster," he said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "And instead of confronting me, instead of trusting 5 years of love and partnership, you chose to believe a stranger's lies and betray everything we built together." "Yes," Raven whispered, tears streaming down her face as she leaned into his touch despite knowing she didn't deserve his gentleness. "I did. I let my pain make me stupid, my heartbreak make me gullible. I became exactly what Marcus needed me to become." The admission felt like tearing her soul open, but also like the first honest thing she'd said in weeks. "I'm sorry, Adrian. I'm so fucking sorry that my weakness might get everyone we love killed. Sorry doesn't stop bullets," Lydia said pragmatically, though her voice held no cruelty. "But intelligent action might. Raven, you know Marcus's communication methods, his timelines, his expectations. We can use that knowledge to feed him false information, set a trap, turn his own strategy against him." She moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the forest beyond where shadows seemed to move with predatory intent. My scouts report unusual movement in the eastern quadrant. He's coming tonight, just as we predicted. Adrian's jaw clenched with newfound determination. Then we stop running from this, he said, his voice carrying the authority of an alpha finally ready to claim his power. No more political marriages, no more genocide plans, no more letting our father's fear and ambition control our choices. He looked between Raven and Lydia, these two women who had been thrust into his life by circumstance, but who might just be the keys to salvation. We end this tonight, all of it. But I need to know. Can I trust you both to have my back when everything falls apart? War doesn't ask permission to begin. It simply arrives like a storm that's been building just beyond the horizon. The first explosion shattered the night like thunder made of flame and fury, sending shockwaves through the pack house that rattled windows and stopped hearts. Raven hit the floor instinctively, her body remembering combat training even as her mind struggled to process that Marcus's attack had begun earlier than anyone anticipated. The ammunition depot, she realized with sickening clarity. He used my intelligence to target our weapons first. We're already fighting at a disadvantage because of my betrayal. Everyone down! Adrian's voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk as more explosions rocked the building. Through the study windows, they could see wolves moving through the forest with military precision, not the wild charge of berserkers, but the calculated advance of soldiers who knew exactly where their enemies' weaknesses lay. Raven watched Marcus's forces emerge from shadows she had mapped for him, using routes she had photographed, exploiting vulnerabilities she had documented like a shopping list for destruction. Lydia was already on her phone, coordinating with underground cells throughout the territory. Northern perimeter is holding, but eastern defenses are compromised, she reported, her voice steady despite the gunfire erupting outside. My people are moving to evacuate the nursery and elder care facilities. We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach the main house. Her violet eyes found Raven's with laser intensity. You know his strategy better than anyone. Where will he strike next? The power grid, Raven said, her tactical mind overriding her emotional chaos. Then communications, then the Alpha's residence. He'll want to take Adrian alive. A public execution will demoralize resistance faster than martyrdom. The knowledge felt like swallowing glass, but she forced herself to think like the spy she'd become, to use her intimate understanding of Marcus's methodology to anticipate his moves. He'll come for you personally, Adrian. This isn't just about territory. It's about proving that he can break everything you represent. Adrian moved to the weapons cabinet with fluid grace, retrieving pistols and ammunition with the efficiency of someone who had trained for this moment his entire life. Then let's not disappoint him, he said, his voice carrying notes of dark anticipation that made Raven's wolf sit up and take notice. This is what an alpha looks like when he stops being afraid, she realized. This is who Adrian becomes when he finally chooses to fight instead of submit. The sound of boots on the stairs made them all freeze. Heavy, measured steps that spoke of invaders moving through their sanctuary like they owned it. Lydia positioned herself behind the desk, gun drawn, while Adrian flanked the door. Raven found herself in the middle, holding a weapon that felt both foreign and familiar in her hands. 3 weeks ago, I was planning to marry this man, she thought, as adrenaline flooded her system. Now I'm preparing to kill or die fighting beside him against an enemy I helped create. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so likely to be lethal. In the space between trigger pull and impact, between heartbeat and silence, the entire world can change. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke, but instead of Marcus's elite soldiers, 3 familiar figures stumbled through the wreckage. Pack members Raven had known since childhood, their clothes torn and bloody, their eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Alpha!" gasped Elena, Raven's oldest friend, clutching a wounded arm against her chest. "They have the children. Marcus, he's using them as human shields. Anyone who resists, he executes a child." The weapon in Raven's hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Children, she thought, her heart shattering as images flashed through her mind. Little Beth, who had greeted her so warmly just hours ago, the toddlers from the nursery who giggled during pack gatherings, teenagers who still believed in fairy tale endings. This is my fault. My intelligence gave him the layout of every safe house, every evacuation route. I might as well have painted targets on their backs myself. How many? Adrian's voice was steady, but Raven could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened around his weapon's grip. He was calculating odds, strategic options, acceptable losses, the cold mathematics of leadership that had been forced upon him far too young. Elena's voice broke as she answered. 17 children, ranging from 4 to 15 years old. He has them in the community center, surrounded by explosives. Says he'll start killing them one by one until you surrender yourself to him. Lydia cursed in 3 languages, her strategic mind obviously racing through scenarios and finding them all unacceptable. It's a trap, she said, though her voice held no relief at the obvious observation. He knows Adrian can't let children die, knows he'll walk into certain death to save them. But if Adrian surrenders, Marcus eliminates the Alpha bloodline and absorbs our territory without further resistance. Her violet eyes met Adrian's with something that looked like grief. There's no good choice here. There's always a choice, Raven said, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised even her. She looked at these 2 people, the man she'd loved and betrayed, the woman who'd offered alliance and forgiveness, and felt something crystallize in her chest. I created this situation. I gave Marcus every advantage he's using against us, which means I'm the only one who knows him well enough to find his weakness. She turned toward the broken door, toward the sounds of chaos and terror echoing through the night. I'm going to end this. Adrian grabbed her arm, his touch electric even in the midst of catastrophe. Raven, no. Whatever you're planning, it's suicide. Marcus wants you almost as much as he wants me. You're proof of his ability to corrupt and manipulate, his trophy representing the destruction of our bond. His blue eyes blazed with fierce protectiveness. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes. The greatest love stories don't end with, and they lived happily ever after. They end with, and they saved everyone who mattered more than themselves. You're right, Raven said softly, her hand covering Adrian's where it gripped her arm. This is suicide, but it's also the only way those children live through the night. She looked around the ruined study, at the scattered documents that had started this whole nightmare, at the weapons they'd gathered to fight a war that couldn't be won through violence. Marcus expects Adrian to surrender himself. He expects Lydia to coordinate a hopeless rescue mission. But he doesn't expect the broken spy he manipulated to walk into his stronghold with the one thing he values more than revenge. Which is? Lydia asked, though her expression suggested she was already calculating the angles, already seeing the terrible elegance of Raven's emerging plan. Outside, the sound of gunfire was diminishing. Not because the battle was ending, but because Marcus's forces had achieved their objectives and were consolidating their control. Time was running out with each heartbeat. Raven reached into her jacket and pulled out the communication device Marcus had given her, a sophisticated piece of technology that would allow her to contact him directly. Information, she said, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. I'm going to tell him I've been playing double agent all along, that my apparent betrayal of his operation was actually me gathering intelligence on Silvermoon's final defenses. I'll offer him Adrian's exact location and a detailed plan for taking the pack house without further resistance. Adrian's face went white as parchment. You're going to actually betray us. After everything we've just been through, after learning the truth about his manipulation. He stopped, his breathing becoming labored as the implications hit him. Raven, if you do this, there's no coming back. Even if we survive somehow, even if your plan works, how do I ever trust you again? You don't, Raven thought, her heart breaking as she memorized every detail of his face, the golden hair that caught lamplight like captured sunlight, the blue eyes that had looked at her with love for 5 years, the strong jaw that she'd kissed 1,000 times in dreams and reality. That's the point, Adrian. You learned to live without me, to love someone worthy of you, to build the future you always deserved. But aloud, she simply said, because you'll know that everything I did, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, was all leading to this moment where I choose to save everyone who matters more than my own happiness. Lydia stepped forward, her violet eyes bright with understanding, and something that might have been admiration. You're going to get close enough to Marcus to eliminate him personally. Use his arrogance and his obsession with psychological victory against him. When Raven nodded, Lydia continued, but you know he'll see through any deception. The only way this works is if your offer is genuinely tempting, which means I have to actually give him Adrian. Raven finished, her voice barely above a whisper. I have to provide real intelligence, real vulnerabilities, a real pathway to victory. And then, in the moment when Marcus thinks he's won everything, his enemy captured, his rival territory secured, his perfect spy proven loyal, I kill him, and probably die in the process. She looked at Adrian one final time, drinking in the sight of him like someone taking a last sip of water before crossing a desert. I love you. I have always loved you. And that's why I'm walking away from you toward certain death, because that's what love actually means. The communication device crackled to life in her hand. Marcus's voice, smooth as poisoned honey, filled the room. Raven, my dear, I hope you're ready to complete your mission. I have some lovely young hostages here who are very eager to see whether their alpha values their lives more than his pride. Raven met Adrian's eyes one last time, saw her own heartbreak reflected there, and pressed the transmit button. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying notes of exhaustion and defeat that weren't entirely fabricated. I'm ready to come home. Heroes are not the people who live through the story. They're the people who make sure everyone else does. The community center looked like a fortress of nightmares when Raven approached, its familiar walls now bristling with armed guards, and the terrible weight of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Through the windows, she could see the children huddled together in the main hall, their young faces pale with terror, while Marcus's soldiers positioned explosives with clinical precision. 17 children, she reminded herself, forcing her feet to keep moving toward what felt like the mouth of hell. 17 futures that depend on me getting this exactly right. Marcus waited for her in the doorway like a king receiving tribute, his silver eyes glittering with triumph and something darker, possessive satisfaction at having finally broken her completely. My beautiful spy, he purred, his voice carrying notes of ownership that made her skin crawl. I knew you would choose pragmatism over sentiment in the end. Love is such a weakness, don't you think? It makes people do such foolish things. He gestured toward the children behind him, his smile sharp as a blade. But intelligence is eternal. I have something for you, Raven said, her hand moving slowly toward her jacket pocket, where both her weapon and a data drive waited. The next few seconds would require precision timing. Too fast, and Marcus would suspect treachery. Too slow, and the children would pay for her hesitation. Complete building schematics of the pack house, including the safe room where Adrian is hiding. Guard rotations, weapon caches, escape routes. Everything you need to end this without losing any more of your own people. Marcus's eyes lit up with predatory hunger as she produced the drive. You've exceeded my expectations, Raven. I thought breaking you would require more persuasion. He reached for the intelligence, his attention focused entirely on the prize, and for one perfect moment, his guard was completely down. Now, Raven thought, her hand shifting toward her concealed weapon, before he realizes that the data drive is filled with everything except what he actually needs. Before he understands that Adrian isn't in the pack house at all, but positioned with Lydia's forces to surround this building the moment I give the signal. The gun felt like justice in her hand, as she pressed it against Marcus's chest, her finger finding the trigger with the certainty of 5 years' worth of love, crystallized into one moment of absolute determination. You were right about one thing, she said, her voice steady as stone despite the chaos erupting around them as his guards realized what was happening. Love does make people do foolish things, like walk into a building full of explosives to save children they barely know, like sacrifice their own happiness for the greater good, like choosing to die rather than let monsters win. Marcus's face contorted with rage and disbelief as he realized the scope of her deception. You think killing me stops anything? My forces will slaughter every child in this building the moment I fall. But even as he spoke, the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Not the desperate resistance of a losing battle, but the coordinated assault of Adrian and Lydia's joint forces, perfectly positioned thanks to intelligence Raven had been feeding them through Lydia's communication network. No, Raven said, her smile carrying all the fierce satisfaction of a gambit played to perfection. They won't. Because your forces just discovered that every piece of intelligence I've given you for the past 6 hours has been carefully crafted misdirection. Your troops are fighting shadows while the real threat surrounds them. Your escape routes lead to dead ends. Your communication systems are compromised. And your hostages. She pressed the trigger as explosions began detonating in sequence. Not Marcus's charges killing children, but Adrian's forces systematically eliminating every strategic advantage Marcus thought he possessed. Your hostages were rescued 20 minutes ago. Some endings are beginnings in disguise, and some loves are too big to be contained by traditional happy endings. 6 months later, Raven stood at the edge of Silvermoon territory, watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of gold and possibility. The scar on her shoulder where Marcus's dying shot had found its mark ached in the morning cold, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded her she had survived when survival seemed impossible. The children were safe, the packs were rebuilding, and the world was learning new ways to resolve conflicts that didn't require genocide or political marriages. "You're leaving." Adrian's voice carried no surprise, only a sadness that felt like morning mist. Present, but not overwhelming. He approached slowly, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly, his hands empty, and his expression carefully neutral. 6 months of healing had been good to him. The shadows were gone from his eyes, replaced by the quiet confidence of a leader who had finally learned to trust his own moral compass. "The underground needs coordinators in the human territories," Raven said, not turning around but feeling his presence like sunlight against her back. "Lydia thinks I have a talent for intelligence work that doesn't involve betraying people I love." The joke fell flat, carrying too much truth to be genuinely humorous. "And I think we both need time to figure out who we are when we're not defined by childhood promises and broken engagements." Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his familiar scent of pine and winter storms, close enough to remember 5 years of love and the taste of his kisses. "I forgave you months ago, Raven. The betrayal, the lies, the way you broke both our hearts. I understand why you made those choices. I even understand why you're making this one." His hand brushed against hers, fingers intertwining for just a moment, long enough to feel like goodbye, brief enough to feel like hope. "I know," she said softly, finally turning to face him and memorizing the way morning light caught in his golden hair. "That's what makes leaving so hard. If you hated me, if you couldn't forgive what I did, walking away would be easy. But knowing that you still love me, that we could try again." She stopped, her voice catching on words too big for her throat. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to let them settle for a relationship built on forgiveness instead of trust." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the forest wake up around them, both understanding that this wasn't an ending, but a transformation. "Write to me," Adrian said finally, his voice carrying notes of hope that made her heart ache with possibilities. "Tell me about the humans you're helping, the problems you're solving, the person you're becoming, and maybe someday." He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken words hung between them like a bridge they might one day have the courage to cross. Raven smiled then, the first genuinely happy expression she'd worn in months. "Maybe someday," she agreed, shouldering her pack and taking the first step toward a future that was entirely her own. "But for now, I have work to do, people to save, a world to change." She paused at the tree line, looking back one final time at the man who would always be her first love, her greatest betrayal, and her most profound redemption. "Take care of yourself, Adrian Silvermoon. The world needs leaders who choose love over fear." As she disappeared into the forest, Adrian whispered to the morning air, "And it needs spies who choose truth over vengeance." The wind carried his words toward her retreating figure like a blessing, like a promise, like the first line of a story that was just beginning to be written. In the space between heartbreak and healing, between betrayal and redemption, between endings and beginnings, we discover that the most epic love stories are not the ones where lovers never part, but the ones where love becomes big enough to encompass growth, forgiveness, and the courage to choose what's right over what's easy.